Voters in Maine head to the polls today to decide on their candidates for Senate. Incumbent Senator Susan Collins runs unopposed on the Republican side, while oyster farmer and veteran Graham Plattner leads in polling among the Democratic candidates. But he faces multiple headwinds, including a story last week by the New York Times that found Plattner had difficult relationships with several former girlfriends. One even alleged that Plattner knew what the purported Nazi symbol he had tattooed on his chest meant, despite his public denial. It should be noted several other women spoke of their relationship with Plattner in warmer tones. This all comes after the Wall Street Journal previously reported that Plattner exchanged sexual text messages with other women during his marriage, and his wife knew. Plattner has since responded to the report, saying he was, quote, far from a perfect boyfriend, and attributing his past behavior to a, quote, dark period in his life. Plattner has been vocal about dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder after his time in the military. Let's bring in MS Now congressional reporter Kevin Fry, who joins us live from Bangor, Maine. Kevin, you've been talking with Maine voters ahead of today's primary. What have you heard them say?
Yeah, I mean, look, and don't confuse them with the Paul Bunyan statue behind me. Look, there's been relatively, as we've been talking to folks over the past several days up and down the coasts of Maine, voters are still standing with Plattner for the large part amongst Democrats, saying they're kind of buying into this narrative that the campaign has put forward, that this is a redemption arc, that he made some mistakes, he came back from the war, he was troubled, and now he's working to improve his life. Never mind that some of these things were just from the last few years. A lot of voters also willing to say those are personal issues. We're focused on the policy. So it comes down to this kind of back and forth of perfect messenger versus perfect message. And a lot of people like what they're hearing from him. We've talked to people at some of these town halls, including one woman, for instance, who said after these last two stories out of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, she really kind of had some reservations, even though she was a volunteer for the campaign. But then she came to the town hall the other night and said she was 1,000% committed behind him, liking his populist, economic, take on the billionaire sort of messaging. Here's, though, some of the trepidation, some of the anxiety that you're hearing from some voters who are kind of willing to say, okay, really, this is the best option we have. Take a listen.
I'd like to think we could get someone that doesn't have as much baggage as Plattner, but right now it looks like he's our best choice to win. So he's got my vote.
I think any of those things are abhorrent, and I'm sorry that he has that. But look at what we're dealing with on a federal level. I mean, they haven't done anything with the Epstein files.
There have been some things that have come out that have disappointed me a little bit about Graham Plattner. However, I still think he's the best candidate.
Then the question becomes, of course, what do voters who have trepidations, particularly if there is another shoe that drops, which I know is engaging in a bit of a hypothetical, but what do those voters do? Some are saying they're committed to staying behind him. They won't necessarily identify what the line too far would be, though we have heard from some who said, you know what, maybe I just wouldn't vote. I don't want Susan Collins by any means. She needs to go, but maybe I just won't fill in that line on the ballot. Now, the one other kind of interesting component here is when you talk about the messenger versus the message, there was a little bit of me that kind of kept going back to 2016 and the Trump part of all of this. Obviously, he has defined our politics for the past decade. Democrats have traditionally liked to tout the fact that they hold their candidates to a higher standard. And so when I would ask voters, okay, I mean, you're saying you're okay, you're willing to accept some of what Plattner has done, but you're very quick to criticize, Trump and the various scandals that he has around him. And their response was, they pale in comparison to what Trump is accused to have done.
Interesting. Congressional reporter for MS Now, Kevin Fry, reporting live from Bangor, Maine. Thank you very much. So, David Drucker, I'll start with you on the politics of the issues surrounding this candidate in Maine. When you look at a candidate that the president himself, who has his own issues as it pertains to women, endorsed in Texas. I think these Maine voters are making the point that I'm pointing to right now, which is look at what we're dealing with. Republicans almost take pride in some of these same issues.
Well, that's certainly one way to look at it, Mika, and a lot of Democrats feel that way. But let's flip it around for a second, right? What have we been talking about with Ken Paxton in Texas for months? That Republican voters have been willing to look past all of the baggage, all of the scandals. I've said repeatedly here that he may be the most scandal-plagued politician I've ever covered. And yet, what have I heard from Republican voters in Texas? What do you expect us to do? The other side is so much worse. And besides, we all have skeletons in our closet anyway. Even if it's true, there's just no way I'm voting for a Democrat. So now we're in Maine, and what are they telling us? Kevin Fry's reporting over the past few days has been very revealing. They're telling him the same things that Republican voters in Texas told me. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but even if it is, we all have skeletons in our closet. And besides, what do you expect us to do? Look at what we're dealing with. And I think this just tells us that all American voters are pretty much alike, and that, 10 years plus into the Trump era, a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle are very much the same in their character and presentation. And it turns out a lot of American voters are the same in what they're willing to tolerate and accept and look past, because they feel like the opposition party, the other side, is so egregious that they don't have a choice.
Yeah, Eugene, obviously David is right. There's that old line that from Trump supporters over the years that we are electing a president, not a saint, and they're willing to overlook so much because they think he'll deliver for them. And that's exactly the kind of sentiment we're hearing out of Maine from Democrats. Yes, as was just pointed out, that some voters find these new reporting from the New York Times, the tattoo, some of the previous posts he's made disqualifying, but maybe not enough. We've heard from more Democrats who say, I don't love all that stuff, but I also want to win this Senate seat, and I believe he gives us the best chance.
Yeah, I think, what is it, Joe Biden's own line, compare me to the alternative, not to the almighty. That seems to be the way American politics works these days, and it has worked over the last decade. Now, did Donald Trump cause all of this, or were voters ready for this? It's a chicken-egg problem or a chicken-egg question, but in the end, that's where we are. And what you heard those voters in Maine saying is that we prefer this to the alternative. And they're looking at the big national picture. They're looking at whether or not Democrats can control the Senate as a way of putting some sort of restraint on the Trump administration, on the last 2 years of Donald Trump's second presidency, which they fear. And so I don't think anything is going to keep those voters from voting for Graham Plattner. I think he wins, obviously, easily today, and I think he has a very good chance of becoming the next senator.
One of the fundamental questions we grapple with in politics today is the rules don't apply to Donald Trump. We've known that. Things that have sunk any other candidate. He has survived routinely since 2016. But does that standard now only apply to him, or have the rules changed for others too? And Rev, that's what's interesting here, because Democrats have still, for the most part, try to keep their candidates within the standards of acceptable behavior, if you will. This is one where, at least for now, they're willing to overlook some things because they think he's the best candidate. They want to win. And truthfully, let's be clear, he's also a very talented politician. He resonates with voters. Like, there's a lot of reasons why his message resonates. There's a lot of people that find him so compelling. But we should note, Susan Collins is a survivor. She has been down the polls before, has won. And I guess that's the concern Democrats have expressed to me, that if these stories reduce the enthusiasm for Plattner just a little, or those like on the fence voters who maybe would have broken to him now go her or stay home, that might be enough for Collins to squeak by again.
The risk is that Susan Collins is someone that has always beat the odds. But the fact is that in many ways, people have changed in terms of their political decisions. I think not despite Trump, but in many ways because of Trump. Trump was not only, when we say that he has baggage and that Paxton is worse, Trump was found guilty by a jury of his peers,
liable.
not Paxton. He was found liable but guilty of the criminal fraud case by a jury of his peers. There's a difference in a guy saying these were allegations I got around them and a guy that was found guilty in civil court and criminal court. Right. And we made him president twice. Yep. So the question is whether or not they'll be like Trump or whether Trump has changed the whole politics. Well,
I think for the Plattner campaign, the focus might be for them, and I've heard a little bit of this. I mean, look, if they want to, because Susan Collins is a survivor, that's for sure, look at her votes and look how Maine has been impacted and look how Maine is doing and how Mainers are doing right now and look at his message and compare them to what she has voted for with this president. And I think you may have a winning argument. I do, despite the reports that are troubling, for sure. I think his message is strong. And many would argue that some of her votes are pretty damaging as well.